Welcome to Political Misfits on Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host Bob Schlehuber. He is back from vacation, from out there lying on the beach. He wasn't lying on the beach, but I think it's funny saying it. Let's get ready to go against the grain. We have a great show for you today. Obviously, we need to start off with the deranged declaration of war on the American public by the President of the United States. It may be trite to say, but it is perfectly correct. Our chickens have finally come home to roost. Do we really believe that the lawlessness, theft, and murder that we assiduously support abroad wouldn't make its way back to our shores? For that matter, the mechanisms of state repression that we complain about from our enemies while cheering on our friends in regimes across the United States, across the world, do we believe that those mechanisms would not be employed on our own soil? Well, whatever you thought before, martial law has basically been declared. Shortly thereafter, we'll discuss the disturbing events in D.C. last night after Donald Trump threatened to activate the same U.S. military that kills, maims, and pacifies in wars of aggression abroad to engage in the same behavior here in the United States. That was immediately followed by a systemic reign of terror where peaceful protesters and bystanders were violently abused, trapped in small areas, and inundated with chemical weapons, in addition to being attacked with flashbang grenades and rubber bullets. This doesn't even touch the attacks and assault on the press. Again, seemingly systemic. A press badge was not necessarily protection from you being attacked or shot by one of the cops. Towards the end of the first hour, we'll get to the story that's buried under the other tragedies that are that we're grappling with as a nation, with the infinitely relevant Joe Biden continuing to embarrass himself and, frankly, embarrass America by being out of his depth in running for office. Aside from the continued and conspicuous lying about his role in liberating movie theaters for the civil rights era, something that he admitted was not true in the 80s, by the way, Biden has also went with his notion of incrementalism and has advised cops to shoot people in the leg as opposed to the heart. This was his big solution, incrementalism, even here. In the second hour, we'll discuss the findings of the independent autopsy of George Floyd in addition to the scourge of public violence or police violence and the structures of our society that perpetuate injustice without accountability. Last but not least, it is Tuesday. That means the most artistic and cultured segment of the network, politics and art. But before we get to anything else, it is imperative. It is entirely, completely imperative that we start here. Unhinged, deranged, and criminally hysterical. Those are just some words that can be used to describe what we saw last night at that Rose Garden with Donald Trump losing his mind, basically declaring martial law on the American public. We have a First Amendment in this country. Congress should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech of the press or the right of the people to peaceably to assemble and to petition the government to redress grievances. Trump, whatever he said in that speech, basically criminalized protests all across the United States. And immediately after he gave that speech, he basically had all of these peaceful protesters on mainstream media basically being tear gas, pepper sprayed, and flashbang grenade, not to mention having helicopters flying above and shooting and attacking press that are watching in order to get the president a photo op in front of the church. The First Amendment doesn't matter at all, apparently, to Donald Trump, who basically has just sicked or threatened to sick the U.S. military, our men, our women, sons, daughters, on the very population that they are supposed to be out there protecting. This started off initially as a call to the governors that was widely described as unhinged, to put it mildly. Let's hear Trump talking to the governors, talking about, you need to dominate the public, you need to dominate the public.
What happened in the state of Minnesota, they were electric stuff all over the world. They took over the police department. The police were running down the street, sirens blazing, the rest of them running. It was on camera. And then they wiped out, you probably, after anything like it, and the whole world was laughing. 3 days later, I spoke to the governor. The governor's, I think, by the quality, the next one died. And all of a sudden, and I said, you got to use the National Guard to take numbers. They did it first, and they did. And I'll tell you that, I don't know what it was. It was, Governor, it was the third night, fourth night. Those guys walked through that stuff like it was butter. They walked right through, and you haven't had any problems since. I mean, they don't. They're not going to go there now. They'll go to some other place.
Now, just so we're clear, as people from various cultures, races, identities, and 140 cities across the United States and in major cities around the world rose up in anger at righteous indignation sparked by the reprehensible murder of George Floyd by former Minneapolis Police Department police officer Derek Chauvin, the orange man that got his jollies going bankrupt and firing has-been celebrities cowered in a bunker while D.C. went up in flames around him. I strongly suspect that the embarrassment of that, the way that looked, that basically all of us, we always in this country, go and attack other countries about their human rights efforts, about the way they deal with protests, and we even go so far as to push for those people to be more hostile in those protests. And yet, when Donald Trump is at the end of this, he doesn't like it. Donald Trump doesn't like it. Donald Trump goes to the Rose Garden and gives this hysterical primal scream that basically has threatened to put military on our home soil in order to attack American civilians pushing their First Amendment rights. Let's hear the clip.
Therefore, the following measures are going into effect immediately. First, we are ending the riots and lawlessness that has spread throughout our country. We will end it now. Today, I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
This is a president of the United States saying he's going to dominate the population, dominate in these peaceful protests. Keep in mind, the overwhelming majority of the protests were peaceful protests. And yet, this unhinged statement came out because Donald Trump was fundamentally embarrassed by his inability to deal with the multiple threats availing this country. All of which, by the way, coming out of his own incompetence of that administration, the incompetence of the administration. Be obscenely clear. The chaos and the violence our political and media class celebrate in civilian populations abroad, the freedom-loving terrorists in Syria and Libya that poses with kittens and chops off heads flush with cash from our taxpayers, the freedom-loving theocratic fascists in Bolivia, or the freedom-loving Nazis in the Ukraine, or for that matter, the pro-democracy rioters in Hong Kong that stabs cops and set police stations on fire. We love those people. We say that's democracy. We say that's what freedom looks like. That's freedom in action. But Trump doesn't like it that much. How do we love such shows of democracy abroad, but we chafe at those shows of democracy at home? And in this very specific case, there is literally several issues that could have incited this right off the bat. You could have made the argument that giving 95% of the income to the top 1% would have shot this off. You could have made the case that people giving all of this money, meaning trillions of dollars, while simultaneously having 40 million people go without a job, could have incited all of this. You could have even argued that having 100,000 people die as a result of just flagrant, outright criminal incompetence should have been enough. But it wasn't. This was the spark. And with this being the spark, the question becomes, how far does this go? Now, understand what we're saying here for the moment. At a time where we have all of these tragedies that avail this country, again, from the standpoint of 40 million people out of a job, 100,000 people that are dead, we're talking about 1 in 4 workers not having a job anymore. We're talking about unemployment benefits that's going to end at the end of, July? We're talking about several crises, all of them by themselves, could have instigated this. When you have this many people that are in difficult suffering straits, all of those things could have incited this, but it ended up being an issue of violence. Now, the question becomes whether or not class and race are going to intertwine in order to make this larger. And I will tell you this, having a president basically try to run roughshod over the population like this by declaring martial law for protests, legitimate protests, when the overwhelming majority of those protests were peaceful, is disturbing, to put it mildly, and in no way should be accepted and must be pushed back on. Bob, I saw this last night and I was like, I need to get to a protest. That's the way I felt. In the moment, I was telling my wife, I was like, yeah, we have to do something. Like, we cannot allow a president of the United States to give an unhinged, off of his rocker speech like that and then have the public acquiesce to that. That's an absolute fail.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's an incredible amount. And yeah, just to process the thoughts there in this moment is a lot. And it is a unique moment where I do think, Jamal, the economic and the cultural, social movements, the race and the labor movements intersect as long as they can find that focus. I mean, the last few months we talked on this show so frequently about how many people have really stepped up in the moment of COVID-19 and have realized the failures of the government to provide basic health care, basic food security, education, shelter for people. And we've seen what a coronavirus could do to people and just rip through these communities. And people have stepped up and responded. And you talk to them and they're like, you know what, for the first time, I'm really realizing the failures of a capitalist system. I'm realizing that the Democrats and Republicans are both not able to respond to this moment, and people were angry. And so then on top of that, in that kind of already primed moment, you're now allowing people to kind of get back into the racial justice movement that has been quieted in many ways. I don't have very much, I don't know what the best word is, but I think the women's movement and the women's march and the resistance movement against Trump really kind of unfocused the larger social unrest that was here in this country. And it got distracted and pulled by a lot of liberals who wanted Trump out, but the good white suburbians kind of folks, they were given that voice and the space to be the front force against Donald Trump, when in reality, the people that have the most anger and the most grievances, and in my opinion, are the Black and brown communities of the United States. And they were out in full force across the country last night. And then you're going to add on top of it what we're already seeing with the economic crisis that's going unresolved and unchecked. Obviously, Donald Trump has no answer on the economic front either, beyond just let's loot and steal as much money from the U.S. government and put it into private banks. And so we are really seeing a new moment in history, and a juxtaposition where the two movements more naturally align. I think the movements have to align if there is going to be kind of a larger shift in how things are done in this country. And it was something that I don't think we've seen in our political space before. We haven't had that leader that's been able to speak to both of them, at least in the last several decades when, I've been more politically conscious as a young adult here. And so we're in this moment now, Jamar, where I think people are responding in ways that I've never seen. The number of calls and messages I've gotten, people have been following my work last night and the night before, late into the evening. We were covering it for Radio Sputnik, out on the streets, talking to people, interviewing with people, following the people, watching the police repression. And so the number of people I've had reach out to me saying, what can I do? Who can I call? Where can I go? I've never seen anything like it. And that's quite remarkable here. We have a 7 p.m. curfew here in the nation's capital that people are going to defy. And it's not just young brown and black people going out. It's white people and it's wealthy people across the board, Jamal.
That's right. It's multicultural. I mean, when we talked the other day, I had the opportunity to ask Eugene, what were the conversations that were on the ground? And Eugene made the point, it's across the board, race and class. It's both.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got to remember, the hopelessness, and that was like the thing it just pains you to see, is on Sunday night, if people saw the images from just blocks from the White House, the AFL-CIO lobby windows were broken and a small fire was set within the building. And you watch these kids go in with their baseball bats or whatever, the skateboards that they had, and were able to break the windows or rocks and stuff. And there's a camera basically like pointing right at them, and none of them have face masks on. It's not about being caught or not caught. It's a level of hopelessness that you see in these kids' eyes, and the rawness of emotion and anger that you can just viscerally see within these people, because they aren't hopeful about their education future. They're not hopeful about their economic future. They have many friends that have been killed in gun violence. Washington, D.C., let's not forget, we had 166 murders in this city. disproportionately in brown and black communities, that these young people have seen their friends die. They have family members that are incarcerated in a system that has 2.5 million people incarcerated. What else is there to do but to respond this way, to feel this way, to have to release that emotion and anger? I mean, humans have to release that emotion that they are feeling, and when there's nowhere else to plug it, yeah, you're going to have things broken. And that's the state of America. So don't be mad at those kids. Be mad at the systems that we've created. Jamar, let's take a quick break here. We're going to be joined by Michelle Whitty, our fantastic producer, who was on the front lines yesterday covering the news with us, watching the tear gas, watching the rubber bullets there first person. So we'll turn to her and talk more about that in our first hour. Give us a call, 202-521-1320, 202-521-1320. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. I'm Bob Schleber here, sort of kind of with Jamarl Thomas. We continue to bring you brand new shows Monday through Friday here on Radio Sputnik 105.5 FM in the nation's capital. You also can check us out streaming live on SputnikNews.com. We also have a fancy Sputnik News app. Download that. You can check us out there and following all of the great stories that our writers produce on a daily basis. If you're not able to watch or listen to us live here on a daily basis, make sure you as well check us out on the podcast in the evening. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, anywhere else, you'll be able to find Political Misfits. And one last plug, Jamarl Thomas runs the fantastic Progressive Soapbox YouTube page. You also can subscribe. You can catch Political Misfits, as well as Jamarl will bring you extra content daily as it breaks. A great place to stay tuned in. We continue to talk now about the protests taking place across the United States in response to the killing of George Floyd, and now in response to Donald Trump's heightened rhetoric. We focus first here in Washington, D.C., where Mayor Muriel Bowser announced curfews for last night, Monday, June 2nd, and again this evening on June 3rd. The curfew is set for 7 p.m. despite polls in Washington, D.C., where the primary is held today, not closing until 8 p.m. Really great support for Democracy Team Bowser. We dive in, though, now to the events of last night, where protesters did not stop protesting at 7 p.m. as the curfew called for. It continued the protest well into the evening. We're joined by our producer, Michelle Whitty, who was on the streets and was herself cleared by Secret Service and military police last night. Michelle, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit more about your experience yesterday.
Hi guys. It was wild. I don't know what to say. There's a lot of footage of where I was, right? I was down right in front of the White House in Lafayette Park, right across the street. They've blocked off the very front of the park, so we were up on the street looking at it. And, one thing I really would like to stress is this was completely peaceful. It was just people who were standing, who were chanting, who were lining up and looking at the service, who were facing off against us and they would march forward and then march back sometimes, but nobody breached these barriers. Nobody was throwing things, was completely peaceful. We were actually kneeling in front of these police just a couple of minutes before they started throwing these stinger grenades and tear gas into the crowd and charged us on horseback.
Yeah, I mean, and I believe, Michelle, at that moment you guys were being pushed back because Donald Trump was walking to the famed St. John's Church, which is just across Lafayette Park on the north side of the park across from the White House. And so seemingly your peaceful protest was interrupted by Donald Trump having to go for a publicity stunt with the Bible. Am I right on that?
For sure. And actually, I mean, this was funny. Like, we're all waiting out there. We know that there's going to be a curfew at 7, So everybody knows. I was thinking, okay, what's going to happen? 7 p.m. is going to roll around, and they're going to kettle all of us somewhere and start making arrests. This is what I thought was kind of likely. And instead, at 6:30, all of a sudden, without warning, the police on horseback lined up, and the cops come, rushing down from their lines, and the military police come rushing from behind inside the park where they were lined up, and just start shoving us along for blocks, throwing these exploding projectiles just directly into the crowd, but also in front of us. So you're being pushed along by soldiers, but it looks like you're being actually pushed into a war zone. And I remember yelling at this guy who was shoving me, saying, well, where the hell do you want us to go? You're pushing me into where there is stuff exploding. And he just kept saying, get the hell out of here, man. That was shoved along. So yeah, without warning, at 6:30, completely peacefully assembled in front of the White House, we were just brutally, violently pushed down the block with no regard to who was there as press or not. To make way for Trump to have his little walk. I will also say, it is frightening what is happening, right? Like, that use of force is frightening. The possibility of escalation is very frightening. For me personally, the most chilling moment of that entire evening, before that charge came, we're all standing at the fence and we can see the Secret Service lined up there, and then we see the military police arrive in these big troop carriers, and then a bunch of suits come out, and you can only see them in a distance, and I realized it was William Barr coming out to walk along the lines and see. And that was the moment where I thought, oh, he wants to come see what's happening because they're going to do something bad.
Yeah,
that was truly frightening moment.
Yeah, I was just saying, Secretary of State Mark Esper also out there with some very direct military dominate the battle space to put down the nationwide protest language. He was out there with Mr. Barr and Donald Trump. Yeah, I mean, my experience last night, just to share with our listeners, and we'd love to hear from you about maybe if you were out on the streets, 202-521-1320. I got down there right as the curfew set at around 7 p.m. And it was kind of a different experience, Michelle, because I was waiting for the 7 p.m. curfew, some type of announcement and a direct movement of people, but 7 came, 7 passed, 7:15, nothing. And about 7:20, 7:30 or so is when a large SWAT team looking military personnel, MPD, as well as federal park police and Secret Service police basically sprinted full speed at us just a block north of the White House and pushed us onto I Street. And we had police behind us then at that point that also ran to us and formed what is known as a kettle, basically when police come from two sides of you and trap you in the middle of it. And at that point, it was fascinating because there was maybe only, 25 or 30 protesters, and there was as many journalists at that point, 25, 30 journalists. And so we had 50 of us completely surrounded by some 100 different fully decked out personnel forming the kettle. The circle starts to close. Journalists start screaming that they're journalists. They announce that journalists have one last chance to get out of the middle, and then they will be released. And so the journalists like myself, we leave the circle, and then they make the arrest of about 15 or 20 of the protesters who were not able to disperse. And so from there, those people were taken, and then I continued to march well into the evening for about 3 or 4 hours into the evening. The police basically were kettling and stopping different groups of people across the downtown areas. Then they marched north into the heart of the city. And the group I was with, I just a few different things just to note here. One, it was fascinating to see kind of the age range of folks. The folks I were with were quite young. There was no clear leader of the group, though many different people took leadership throughout. And that's always a really powerful kind of thing to see an organic movement take shape and form, that there are leaders and there are people that step up and direct crowds, tell them to slow down, tell them to get water. They do speeches along the way, and then we're strategizing. But then it also comes with like a lack of deep knowledge around protesting, where people were getting lost a little bit in the neighborhoods of where they were going. One kid looked me dead in the eye and goes, "We should double back on them and go back to the White House." I was like, I'm pretty sure we're not going to double back on the National Guard and catch them by surprise all of a sudden and get to the White House. But again, that emotion is what's driving people. I don't think there's a deep political education right now to a lot of the people, as they are going to learn on the fly over the next days as protests continue. The scariest moment, though, of the night is when we got down into Chinatown, which is a heavy commercial area, lots of storefronts, lots of businesses. The main arena and sports center are right there. Once we got onto 8th Street and started marching down that street, a military helicopter, basically with, I think, a military aid helicopter, a large red cross on the bottom of it, basically started to sit itself down close on top. It couldn't have been more than 100, 200 feet above us, kicking debris and sand into the eyes of all of the protesters, sirens blasting, loud grenades, basically pushing the crowd out of that downtown area. The crowd then started marching towards the Capitol, and once again, the helicopter basically trapped them again near the Capitol, sat down on them for a good 5 or 10 minutes, which is just a terrifying thing to be late into the evening. You're past curfew. You're only with a few hundred people. You have plenty of military, plenty of police around you sitting down that helicopter. They then marched towards the Capitol, and once they made the left-hand turn, which would basically take you into the neighborhood of Capitol Hill, which is one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in all of Washington, D.C., that's when it really escalated. Tear gas, flash grenades. And then they basically, instead of stopping people from marching forward, they basically got behind the crowd, as Michelle was saying. And then I thought I was safe at the back of the crowd, just kind of watching people march well ahead of me. They started throwing flash grenades at the back of the crowd, basically creating a stampede and a running effect into the front of the crowd. And then everybody dispersed from there. But quite terrifying to be a journalist, to be off to the side, covering it at a safe distance, and then have a flash grenade all of about 10 feet thrown away from me. We also know that there were legal observers arrested as well. So now you have press with flash grenades also being kettled. You have legal observers being also arrested. And Jamal, you talked there, Donald Trump basically threatening martial law. These things have to be greatly concerning to the masses, and people need to respond. And I appreciate you, Jamal, saying, like, I'm moved. I'm going to go out there. I have risks that I have to take, and to be calculated about it. But it seems like this is, I mean, it is kind of ticks off all the boxes. Stop the press, stop the legal observers, and increase military force. And that is a quite historic and quite scary moment, Jamal.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, after Trump said that, I thought to myself, this is so jumping the shark. Like, it's so overboard. And in it being overboard, he's trying to use a 200-year-old law in order to basically put military on our grounds. Michelle, I'm curious, when you were on the ground, I know you didn't necessarily get a chance to talk to people because you guys were under threat. I could hear the flashbangs going off behind you and everything else. But what was your impression in regards to the way you were engaging with, I guess you could say, the military, or for that matter, the police? Basically, those things are almost the same thing at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really talking to people about their motivations when I was down there. All my press credentials are locked up in the Sputnik office, where I haven't been now for weeks. So it just seemed like too much of a hassle and kind of dodgy for me to go down there without any press credentials and be calling myself press. So I did not have my press hat on, so I wasn't talking to people. But it was mostly the mood of the crowd was a level of like incredulity at just watching not only the Secret Service and the Park Police, but then the SWAT teams to come out and the military police come out, and people really saying, as I said to someone at some point, as they were like, shoving us down the road, is this what you signed up for? Like you signed up to point your weapons at protesters? This is what you're here for? And I think this was the mood of the crowd was really like, whose side are you on? The time is here. The time is approaching where you might have to make a difficult choice, and you better think about what that choice is going to be. That was really a lot of the sentiment that I experienced. And honestly, I cannot stress enough the fact that you just had a crowd of people doing nothing more threatening than chanting, who were suddenly pelted with gas and these exploding stinger balls. There wasn't. Apparently, I'm hearing that some people who were on the other side of the crowd heard a very faint order to disperse. I can tell you that no one heard it where I was, which was right where the police were. They were standing in front of us. They could have given us an order. They could have made sure their megaphones and loudspeakers were working anytime they wanted. So, for all of us standing there, we were totally unaware that we were defying any kind of order because it was before curfew and we hadn't heard anybody tell us what to do. So the way they decided to tell us what to do was to start gassing us, and I think, Bob was talking about people getting an education on the fly. I think that was an education for a lot of people.
And the sad part is oh, go ahead, Bob. I'm sorry.
Finish thought. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that I'm showing an image now where they basically locked people in and lobbed tear gas. I mean, this is stuff that you can't necessarily do at war that these guys are doing on the domestic territory.
Yeah. I just posted here go to our Twitter handle, Sputnik Misfits, and you can see a couple of videos from last night if you want to see the helicopter footage there in downtown Washington, D.C., or if you just want to see some of the flash grenades and the tear gas, you can go to Sputnik Misfits on Twitter. I just posted those, and you can check those out. Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly confusing, too, and people have to remember Washington, D.C. is this kind of weird space. We're a territory. We don't have representation in Congress, hashtag not a democracy. Basically, you have this mix between the Metropolitan Police Department and you then have the National Federal Secret Service and the Parks Police. And there's different rules that govern them, for example, Jamar. One, for example, is the Metropolitan Police Department have a rule that if anybody asks what the name of an officer and their badge number is, that officer is to immediately tell that to you, which is another just check, kind of just community check on the police. The federal government does not have that same rule or guideline. And so you go up to some police or some officers and you just say name and badge number, and they wouldn't give it to you. And so now we all of a sudden, again, have kind of this like secret police force and this very kind of transparent police force. And so you have multiple police forces in that area. And as Michelle mentioned, you had Muriel Bowser call for a curfew at 7 p.m. last night. And then you have basically Donald Trump saying, no, it's my curfew, I'm taking over. And then they have the dispersal take place, which caused confusion amongst the police ranks here. And so it's a very, very confusing times. But Jamar, let's take a quick break here. When we come back, we'll actually talk to somebody who was kettled, witnessed that tear gas in one of the residential neighborhoods here in Washington, D.C., where police made outrageous arrests and people had to take shelter in neighbors' homes for safety. We'll take a quick break. Now we'll be back on Political Misfits after this.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Fios TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey, everybody, my name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show.
This is Tom Luongo of Gold Coast and Guns.
Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning and I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day, I tune to Fault Line with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here, sort of kind of with Jamarl Thomas. Big shout out to our radio engineers there at Radio Sputnik, keeping us live on air from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Talking about the nationwide protest last night, give us a call, 202-521-1320 if you have anything to say on that matter. We're now joined by Tracy Redd, an organizer and activist who was also present at the protest in D.C. last night and several nights before that. Tracy, thank you, and welcome back to Political Misfits. Tracy, you here?
Hello?
Hey, there you are. Tracy, welcome back to the show.
As I was saying, it's always great to be on the show, Bob.
Fantastic. Well, Tracy, you were out and about last night. I just wanted to correct myself from the last segment. I had said Secretary of State. I meant Secretary of Defense, or as somebody would say, Secretary of War. Mark Esper had encouraged governors, Tracy, to dominate the battle space to put down nationwide protests. And you also had LA Mayor and Democrat Eric Garcetti said all cities are cooperating on tactics through federal fusion centers. I say Democrat 3 times because people remember that this is a bipartisan effort by Republicans and Democrats to use the state as a repressive force. There are no good sides on our two-party political system to take. But Tracy, a scary moment here. We have the federal government, we have local mayors calling for repressive actions and the full force use of their military as well as their police in these different cities. You were out last night. You were actually in a residential neighborhood. So again, this isn't just targeting the Washington, the White House or the Washington monuments or the Congress. This is now in a neighborhood last night. Tell us a little bit more. You were protesting with folks. You then were kettled in a residential neighborhood and encircled by police in a moment of incredible solidarity. Neighbors on the block were able to then let you in their house, but others are saying that there were flash grenades, tear gas, pepper spray. Tell us a little bit more of the march last night that led up to that moment.
The march met up with people down at towards Lafayette Square and Farragut Square. And after I left, that's when I got word that people were being kettled and arrested Lafayette Square. And the group I was with had to continue to head up North 13th Street. But on my way to the protest last night, I live almost as far north in the city as you can get. And even the Target, literally on the border of D.C. and Maryland, was also starting to border up. And the CVS by my house was also bordered up. And so it was also quite a scene, not just to see buildings downtown bordered up, but also in my own neighborhood here in Tacoma, D.C. And after we made our way on 14th Street, we turned down the residential street and we was going through alleys and, noticed that the police were starting to surround us on all sides on Swan Street. And my friends and comrades I went with, I was like, I don't know what we're going to do, but while we're going on 14th Street, it was kind of like this moment of a little bit of laughter. We're like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if we were like trapped in a residential neighborhood and we have to like find refuge and we start knocking on doors that had Black Lives Matter signs on their window to really put them to the test? Like, would that be something? And then sure enough, probably an hour later, that became a reality.
So talk us a little bit more then through the point of which then the police did kettle you, basically closing in on both sides of you, forcing you to basically have nowhere to go at that point. Some people were arrested. Some people went in the homes. Tell us a little bit more about that and what level of force did the police use?
The police were out there in their riot gear. They blocked the alleyway and then we ran north to south from Swan across Swan Street. And they were on 14th Street and 15th Street and on the alleyway on the other side. So we were literally surrounded on all sides. This is a neighborhood in D.C. full of row houses, so there aren't any ways to really cut through, houses like you could maybe at other parts of the city. And when I realized that police were lining up and my friends were face to face, I told them like, hey, I can't arrest it because I'm still facing charges in that action I did in Texas, as you know. And I saw someone out there from steps, and I was like, hey, I have medical supplies, risk arrest, and I come inside. They were like, yeah, sure, of course. It was literally just it. And then from there, I was trying to watch the scene, and then when they started to move, and their shield was saying, move back, and like all types of sounds, I was in the basement looking through the blinds as my comrades and my friends and strangers and at that night were being pushed further down Swan Street towards 15th Street. Yeah. So they ended up being circled completely.
Yeah, 202-521-1320. Stay tuned here on Radio Sputnik. all day. I know on By Any Means Necessary, the show that is after us, they'll continue to talk to people that were also arrested and were forced into homes there in that neighborhood in Washington, D.C. There was one homeowner who let about 100 people into their home, an incredible moment of solidarity that they were willing to take those people in right now. And an incredibly scary moment, too. I mean, we still can't forget about the coronavirus is still going out, people trying to wear masks, but a lot of people not social distancing, and we're taking calculated risks right now. I mean, do you get tear gassed by the people, Jamarl, or do you basically try to continue to fight back in this moment, even though despite the risk? And that's the kind of this weird calculus. I mean, Donald Trump can play that hand constantly and say, look, we shouldn't be out there because of social distancing and the coronavirus, which plays into his hand, which is going to allow him to continue to strengthen the oppressive nature of the state. We do have a caller on the line here, Daniel. Daniel, you want to get in here?
Yes, I wanted to ask, because me and my honey talked about the protest, and we made a conscious decision not to participate in the protest. That being said, we would like to support the protest. What can people like me do other than that person who had that house in the middle of the protest, letting all those protesters in?
That's great, Daniel. We'll let you listen off air to the response by Tracy Redd, an organizer and activist who has joined us here on Political Misfits. You can also give us a call, 202-521-1320. Tracy, how can people be supportive right now?
I think the most important thing is, the hashtag Blackout Tuesday is going around, confusing people as if they should be off of social media. This is not the time to take a break from social media. This is the time to be on Twitter, be on social media. We know many times this is the only breaking news feed that we have into what's going on around the city is via social media. So make sure that you're amplifying local people that are out there in the streets. Donations are going to be taken later on today, I believe, at Luther Place off of 14th Street at Logan Circle, starting later on this afternoon if people want to drop off your donations as well.
Yeah, and check in with your local Black Lives Matter organization or others who are out there. There's people that ask like that. So thank you for the call. I mean, Jamarl Thomas, I always appreciate you having started the Progressive Soapbox. You were somebody moved into these spaces and said, look, I want to start talking about these issues, and gathering people, especially people who may not be as engaged already. That's a great starting point. I think Progressive Soapbox and other platforms like yours, Jamarl, do a lot as well to call attention to this. And as Tracy's speaking to right now, again, there's not going to be a ton of media out there. It's another calculation. Obviously, there's been a ton of furloughs and layoffs at media companies across the board with the economy. And so right now it is about amplifying and taking video as much as people feel safe to do.
It is. I mean, and it's everyone starts somewhere, right? Like everyone has that thing that happens to them. I would imagine some people might be born with a certain view of the world that kind of where they organize themselves or coordinate themselves, carry themselves a particular way in regards to the way they see the world just from basis. But I think a lot of people had an arc, right? I mean, it was things that they saw or things that dug into them that kind of changed their point of view. I think for mine, and believe it or not, it was Olbermann, it was the lefty media, and eventually you get beyond that point when you realize, oh, right, those guys are just part of the machine, and, you just move on and you expand. It's vastly important. Like, for example, Tracy, when you're making the argument about the media is not going to be out there, how much media was out there getting attacked and whatnot when you guys were there yesterday?
Wait, sorry, can you repeat that question?
How many people were there, meaning from the standpoint of the media? I mean, we were seeing media get attacked basically all over the United States, but when you guys were huddled up in that person's house who allowed you to go into the house because the cops basically were getting you from both ends and inundating you with chemical weapons. How much media did you guys see out there recording and observing this stuff?
I didn't see too many. I had one media person from French Channel 5 that was in D.C. right now that followed me from the White House, basically all the way up 14th Street. And at one point, they left to go back to the hotel to, gather up all their footage. I didn't see too much. I know that someone from WUSA 9 was on the steps looking into the crowd further down Swan Street as well. So I know there were some people there, but, I had to either go to another assignment or something like that. But I was in contact with a couple people, but I didn't see any cameras. I saw some reporters that was out there tweeting But I haven't seen.
Yeah, it was interesting because near the White House, and you kind of just go to focal points, especially if you're not from Washington, D.C. It's a big ask for a reporter to follow a group of a few hundred people into the neighborhoods of the city if you don't know where you go, don't know where your car is. And so it was interesting. The group I was with, Jamal, I think it was the last group to be fully arrested or kettled last night and dispersed around 11 o'clock at night. I guess that's the one weird silver lining that the curfew was so early that the evening was done at 11 p.m. as opposed to 2, 3, 4 in the morning. Obviously, the people that were trapped in those houses in the neighborhood where Tracy was, they were not allowed to leave until 6 a.m. when the curfew was lifted. But again, you're just not going to have that much media in the circles. There was some big time. The Washington Post, New York Times had people throughout, but even they were pretty foreign to protest, and talking to them about it showed that they just were kind of uncertain themselves. And so that is a very uncertain and a historical moment. I'll also say another thing to just add on to other things people do: call your government officials and call out the lack of response by the officials. And then if they do respond, really critically read what they're writing and what their actions are. My local council member, for example, wrote a long email about how hard it is to be black in this country, even though she's a white female and will never understand, and talked about white guilt and the need for white people to step up and the need for us to study racism and to read all of these books. But nothing in her letter talked whatsoever about cutting the military police budget, the police budget of Washington, D.C., nothing to cap the number of police here in Washington, D.C. And we have a time where you have a $700 million deficit. The mayor has already proposed her new budget, which cuts money from violence interruption services, from mental health services, from housing production, cut all of those services. And yet she's able to increase the police budget by 3%, a budget that's already over $500 million. They are able to increase that by 3%, as well as continue to hire new people. Nothing in there whatsoever, Tracy, right? And so this kind of balance that people really do need to make sure that they're being conscious to. The words are one thing, but the actual material conditions are another thing. And I posted on Facebook and Twitter, basically, all the white tears are coming out now by our council member. And within 24 hours, I got a call from the communications office there. And so you will get response, especially if you start needling and calling out the lack of action and the only words. Tracy, I mean, a little bit more about how do you kind of keep pressure on the government system, and how do you kind of decipher what's a real actual demand, and when do you actually say, hey, good job, that is what we're looking for, and when can you tell that the people are just kind of talking out of their places, not their mouth there?
Yeah, well, but it's interesting you brought that up today in D.C. is election day. I live in Ward 4, where my council member is Brendan Todd, who isn't doing enough, to support Black people in this ward or across the city, and supports the police. And we have another person that's running, Janice Lewis-George, who supports all the ideas, pay someone leave and divesting from the police. So I think that is definitely going to show and definitely play a part in how I drove past one of the voting sites today when I was finally able to leave the house on Swan Street, and I saw many people lined up in support, of their candidates. So it's definitely going to show in a polls today. I'm really interested to see how, I know I voted absentee over a week ago, but my mind was made up from the jump. My council member and my part of DC just lacks in the leadership that's needed to say the words divest from the police. It's like how it's all kind for people just to say the words Black Lives Matter as if that was a political. People still think Black Lives Matter is a political statement that shouldn't be used at workplaces. Well, my friend at his job, Barbizon Lighton, came out with a whole statement. Nickelodeon today is trending on Twitter right now as we speak because they took a whole 8 minutes and 46 seconds of just having the words "I can't breathe" on their screen over and over again, which was a color change initiative that was done on all 28 of Nickelodeon's channels.
Yeah, powerful. An 8 minute or so video there of just breathing, an incredible statement. And speaking to the political sphere of things, and Tracy, we're in overtime with you. If we could borrow 10 more minutes of your time, just always love talking to you here on Political Misfits, 202-521-1320. The person you mentioned running for that ward council seat had actually called for there not to be an increase of police funding. And there's a response to those things. A lot of people want more police. They want more police spending. They have no problem with Donald Trump and what he's doing right now. People need to remember that people are just not simply all on the same page against what Donald Trump is doing is wrong. A lot of people want what Trump is doing. A lot of people have no problem with the military. But talking a little bit about what's happening then in the Democratic Party, breaking news here. Nancy Pelosi, holding up a Bible, urges Trump to help the country heal. So I wonder if Pelosi with the Bible is going to help anything, but I did want to talk about what Joe Biden had to say here yesterday. Joe Biden, Tracy read in his own words, talking about what his plans were and what some of his thoughts were while speaking at a black church in Delaware. Let's be lifted up by Joe Biden's words here. Let's have a clip and get your thoughts here, Tracy.
And the idea that instead of standing there and teaching a cop who's an unarmed person coming at him with a knife or something to shoot him in the leg instead of in the heart is a very different thing. There's a lot of different things that can change.
Okay, well, I don't even know where to start with the idiocracy of saying just shoot them in the leg. Have people ever watched the videos of these police killings? These police officers are acting out of pure adrenaline. There's no thought process. There's no aiming. There's no targeting. Philando Castile was shot 7 times in his car while he was sitting there while reaching for his license and permit. He was shot 7 times. There was no like, oh, let me strategically aim at them. Other police officers shoot people in the back while they're running full speed. You're not running full speed and shooting at somebody strategically. You're just opening up fire. In other situations, Breonna Taylor there, they walked into her bedroom and they opened up fire, hitting every room in the person's house and her house, as well as neighbors' houses. To think that all of a sudden, like, police are strategically aiming at people's heads and the mere fix is just simply aiming at their legs. Jamal, I mean, it's completely absurd. And the response by the Democratic Party leadership is, let's grab a Bible, pray, and shoot them in the leg.
Yeah, you have no idea how that angers me. Like, I am sitting here, like, grimacing. Yeah, the shoot them in the leg thing is stupid on so many levels. Like you said, they shoot people in the back, they shoot people in the chest. I mean, the reason they aim for the center of gravity is because, like you said, their adrenaline is going haywire. And that's not that, you know, the aiming process, you're just trying to put the guy down. Also, not to mention, Floyd was choked to death. Eric Garner was choked to death. I mean, you have one case after the next where the person is in handcuffs and gets choked to death. So, you know, this notion that the only way that cops murder people is with guns is nonsense. Not to mention, I think you can do better than the incrementalism of, hey, just shoot him in the leg as opposed to murdering the guy. That point. But yeah. on the other point, the Nancy Pelosi thing is obscene. You are in government. Nancy Pelosi is not part of no movement. Nancy Pelosi is in government itself. That is her device. That is her area. And in that area, the best thing she can do is grab a Bible. Oh, that's horrendous. She needs to lose her job. Big time.
Yeah, let's get a call in here. DJ, always nice to hear from you. DJ, thanks for calling in. Anybody else can call in 202-521-1320. DJ, what's on your mind today? DJ, let me just get 1 second to get you on the line here. Tracy, what's your thoughts there on either Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden?
You know how I feel about Joe.
Tracy, you got poked by Joe Biden, so you guys are old friends at this point.
Oh, me and Joe go way back. So, I mean, Joe Biden is not going to be the candidate I endorse. Once again, I live in D.C. Whoever the Democratic person is will get their vote. He will not get mine. But in terms of Nancy Pelosi, she's the third most powerful person in this country. You know, she's the most powerful Democrat, you know, to an elected office. I always said that Nancy Pelosi, but she ripped up, you know, the speech at the State of the Union. People like, oh my gosh, she's so radical. I'm like, Nancy Pelosi is not radical. Nancy Pelosi is not out in the streets. You know who was in the streets this past weekend? Rihanna. You know, like, can we get someone like Rihanna to an elected position in this country? Because Rihanna is literally out here in the street putting her black body as a black immigrant, as a non-U.S. citizen, on the line in a city where the Democratic mayor is saying, you know, we need more police force and stuff like that. You know, that's the type of people I need if we're going to have a Democratic party or Democratic system in this country, quote unquote. I need more people to be elected.
The movement, I will also note, if Rihanna's listening, the movement needs music as well, and we could use a new CD from our new album from her if she's listening. So I'm just putting that out there. It's a good time. We're all waiting.
There's a lot that rhymes with progressive soapbox, by the way, Rihanna, just in case.
Slide it in, the branding there. Rihanna, thank you for listening, as always, if you are listening. One other story I wanted to get in here before the end of our hour, before we head into a second hour here on Political Misfits. On Monday, Facebook employees staged a virtual walkout in protest of CEO Mark Zuckerberg's handoff approach to President Trump's increasingly inflammatory posts around the George Floyd protest. Quite an interesting response here as more and more people kind of gather and speak up in this moment. Facebook spokesperson Liz Berjos said that the company is open to feedback from employees and that, quote, we recognize the pain of many of our people are feeling right now, especially our Black community. According to Facebook's 2019 diversity report, just 3.8% of employees are Black. And on Monday, the company also committed to donating, guys, $10 million, which is roughly 0.2% of its 2020 first quarter earnings to racial justice groups in the United States. I don't know how to feel about this, Jamar. I guess they won't hire Black people. They're not necessarily going to pay Black people or give them money. But I guess a few posts and some pushback on Trump is better than nothing.
It's basically what Democrats do, right? I mean, it's you guys were talking about it today. It's great to have somebody and say, hey, we care about this particular community and we want to support this particular community. But the real support of a community, the real endpoint of that is, do you improve the economic conditions? I mean, right? I mean, if we're talking, you talk about Bowser all the time here in DC and how the difficulties about homelessness and those type of things, and that basically you're on those front lines because she's not doing her job. I mean, the multiple all throughout the United States. If you really want to deal with issues. If you want to hire somebody who's African American, great. I would appreciate you doing that. But if we're talking about a political space or even from a business standpoint, it really does boil down to how do you materially benefit and ameliorate the rough edges of our system. And until you do that, everything else is just words.
Yeah, and that kind of, I just think of identity politics. The council member, Brianne Nadeau, shout out there, her office calling me this morning and basically saying the comms person who called me said, Brianne recently hired an African American to basically help her work on these issues. And just so she knows, Tracy, an African American has been hired. And that's really kind of this frustration, again, where it's simply about identity politics for many Democrats out there. And Democrats just simply think, hey, if we just hire enough Black people, that will solve the problem, as if some Black people like Muriel Bowser aren't the problems themselves.
Skin folk and kinfolk. I can say that, Bob. You cannot.
Thank you. Tell us more about identity politics in the realm of 2020 and the Democratic Party, Tracy Red. I mean, how do people work around that? I mean, as a white person, obviously I listen to it, I hear it, I don't push back to that person. I'm not going to get in an argument with that. Obviously, more Black people need jobs. They're not hired at the same rates as white people. So yeah, more power to you. But I mean, how do we tackle that issue? Is it just more Black people speaking up on that is the best answer?
I mean, yes, I just like I talk about advocacy and, activism, there's many tools in the toolbox to get what we need to get to our liberation. When people ask me, like, how can governments and stuff support, during the time, one, government to please lift up the curfew, and two, just give us money. To be straight up and very honest, I mean, people are very well know what, we could solve the homeless issue if we just gave more money to solve the homelessness issue in the city. I mean, we could solve, the education gap, control, all that. If we just gave more money to the issues that actually affect Black and brown people in this community, we actually aggressively raise the minimum wage and lower, the rent costs in the city, that could solve many of the, economic problems that Black people in this city face as well. So money is just capitalism.
Yeah. I mean, I think that gets back to your point overall, Jamar, where a lot of this is around class economics. And basically, we spend more money on repressing people because it's about protecting the capitalist state. The escalation of police last night when those protesters turned towards Capitol Hill in that neighborhood, it was a no-go whatsoever. That's one of the wealthiest, whitest parts of the city, and that was off limits, and the police escalation skyrocketed within seconds and just caught all sorts of people out of guard. It was pure chaos from there, and so much of it's manufactured poverty, right? These are issues that we can actually systemically address. We have plenty of quote-unquote resources to do so, but that's not the goal at the end of the day, and money needs to move hands if we're ever going to address this. With that, though, we are out of time. Big thank you, Tracy Red, organizer, activist extraordinaire here in Washington, D.C. Tracy, what's the Twitter handle? Where can people find you online? All right, you're going to have to search for him yourself there, my political Misfits. With that, we are at the end of our first hour. After the break, and in our second hour, we will talk about Donald Trump's threat to impose martial law and an exploration of where the state goes now to protect its property. And later in the hour, we look at the world of sports in our weekly Politics of Art segment. All of that and more. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in DC. We're back after this.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm happy to be rejoined by my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. We still have lots to cover over the next hour, including the autopsy findings of one George Floyd, in addition to the famed Politics of Art segment, where we're going to delve into sports. You guys are going to like this one, particularly the sports fans. It's that interplay between sports versus politics. I love it. As always, your chats, calls, and tweets are amply appreciated. You can reach us at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Also, if you're digging the content, give us a like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. We are indeed trying to grow Political Misfits. Now, over the course of the last several days, cities across the United States have erupted overwhelmingly peaceful protests with pockets of fire and broken glass that were basically ignited by the heinous murder of one George Floyd by former cop Derek Chauvin as he kneeled on his throat for an agonizing 8 minutes and 46 seconds. 3 of the other officers that was there that participated, who basically watched the man get killed, have not been charged, but those officers have been fired. Ellison is looking into the case, and there's talk about charges forthcoming. Yesterday, an independent examiner hired by Floyd's family concluded that its death was a homicide from asphyxiation from the sustained pressure when his neck and back were compressed and blood flow was cut to his brain. To discuss the latest examiner's findings and the repercussions of Donald Trump unleashing a militarized police force on peaceful protesters, not to mention how do we go about reforming the police force if that is indeed the solution, we are joined by Dr. Alex Vitale, sociology professor at Brooklyn College and author of the recent book, The End of Policing. Alex, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you, especially now with everything that's going on. Your timing here is absolutely perfect. I think that what most perturbs me about what took place from the standpoint of Floyd had to do with the casual way in which they killed him. Meaning they were on video, everybody could see it, and they were doing this as if this was the most casual thing in the world, killing this man. What disturbed you most about this from your vantage point and from your perspective dealing with criminal justice?
Well, it was clear that his life didn't matter. It was just not something they were concerned about. In the same way that Eric Garner's life didn't matter to them. The same way that Tamir Rice's didn't matter to that police officer. And what we see in the protests going on and the aggression, the violence, the targeting of journalists, et cetera, is just a police force nationally that's out of control. I think part of this is that, a kind of Band-Aid has been ripped off. Police went around saying everything was going to be fine. They were going to take some implicit bias training and that would fix everything. And it's not working. And they don't have any more solutions. And so they're just letting loose on people.
That's an interesting point. We're getting into this notion of training, because you're right. Oftentimes they would say, okay, we're going to get sensitivity training and we're going to cuddle puppies and kittens and people are going to like us better. We're going to do some propaganda shots with us, hugging civilians or taking knees. But the reality of it is that this hasn't worked. So what is the solution to this? Is it reforming the police or is it defunding the police? Because those seems to be the two prevalent ideas, at the very least on social media, that people are discussing.
Yes, well, I've written 2 pieces this week, one for The Guardian and one for The Nation, that explores this idea of defunding the police at both the local and the national level. And I think that's really the direction we need to be going in. I think, though, that defunding has to be combined with a refunding of alternatives and an invest-divest model. That's really the cutting edge of what people in communities across the country are increasingly saying. They're tired of hearing about body cameras, tired of hearing about police community encounter sessions. They want the police out of their lives as much as possible, and they want problems in their communities solved without the use of police.
You know, I'm curious, from your standpoint, what are the main problems that drive this level of inability to get anything changed? Meaning, because when I look at this as a racial and a class issue, where it's kind of the interplay going on at once. Meaning a person who, for example, Eric Garner. I always use this example. Eric Garner was basically killed selling Lucy's, and would he have been killed selling Lucy's if he was making $50,000 a year? It's not so much the amount per se. I'm just kind of making this point that there's a certain level of society that we allow from the standpoint of poverty. And there's an element of our society, especially going back from slavery to now. You can look at the numbers, just the statistics on it, that is far more disadvantaged than another aspect of the society that basically incentivizes or creates the conditions for this level of back and forth. What are the conditions that drive basically this interaction between cops in the first place, but also the inability to actually fix this issue, either, like you said, either through defund or, for that matter, reform?
You know, when venture capitalists do a hostile takeover, loot the value of a business, line their own pockets, nobody calls the police. This way that we understand the problems in communities of color as being the result of this kind of, individual and group moral failure need to be criminalized. This system is not interested in treating people equally. Legal framework that police are asked to enforce reproduces class and race inequality in the United States. And so when reformers say, well, we'll just make the police more professional, we'll just, make them more sensitive so that they can go back to enforcing the law, this ignores the ways in which those legal frameworks are at the root of gross inequalities in American society. The way the war on drugs is structured has never been about drugs or public safety, right? It's been a legal framework for racialized oppression. So giving narcotics units anti-bias training is beyond ridiculous. We need to get rid of the war on drugs and invest resources in communities that need them.
That's an extremely good point. Richard Nixon started the drug war in order to lock up blacks and hippies, meaning it's in the bricks, meaning the entire point of that law or the entire point of that policy was to go after his political opponents. Reforming the cops in this case is almost neither here nor there since it was built to do exactly this. We have a caller on the line. DJ, what's going on, DJ?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? What's up?
Oh, okay. Yeah, like I was saying, I got disconnected. If you want to look at what makes them fear the most in general, just look at this stuff that's constantly getting attacked. You have officers shooting paint canisters on the porches of people's homes. They're marching through the streets to instill fear. You see them shoot rubber bullets and tear gas and tasers at anyone with a camera. You see them on camera planting bricks and setting fires. Actually identified officers later on setting fires, breaking glass so that they can justify their presence. And then you see the president, he's sending dog whistles to citizens to shoot each other. The thing that's feared the most is citizen unity versus the government. That's why there's that heavy emphasis on the racial aspect as opposed to the government doesn't have this authority. That's why Democrats are silent, because that expansion of power helps them. That's why Nancy Pelosi, you said she has a Bible instead of talking about, hey, there are these rules that restrict him from doing this. What President Trump is attempting to do is turn people against themselves, because even if the entire military got involved,
They're powerless against a nation with 400 million guns in the hands of 300 million civilians. It's just a very poor attempt at what he's doing. But that's a tactic that it's just not going to work, because it's like a mouse backing an elephant into a corner. And if you bet anything into a corner and you don't give it an option, a viable option of escaping and just maintaining itself, it's going to get violent. And we don't have to worry about the full extent of military force, because the full extent includes the Air Force and drone strikes. We're not going to do that on our own soil. The people who would be doing those drone strikes, they live here. Their families are here as well. So that's not an option available to them.
Yeah, DJ, as always, thank you so much for your call. I mean, yeah, Dr. Vitale, I mean, that's a fascinating statement there from DJ, and he always has those for us here on Political Misfits. But for me, it was interesting. About a few months ago, I was talking to my council member's office, and I said, look, we're going to need some type of letter of support that allows us essential mutual aid workers to continue to operate in the neighborhoods if this thing escalates, if there is some type of curfew, if there is some type of crackdown, or if the police presence ratchets up. And she goes, no, we're not going to get to that point. We're not going to see that. And here we are, June 2nd, 2020, at a point where we have a curfew of 7 p.m. In New York, I think it's 8 p.m. this evening. So the curfews are getting earlier and earlier. Dr. Vitale, where does it go from here? I mean, Donald Trump talking about martial law, essentially. What's your thoughts? And I obviously guess hard to predict the future at this point, but what is kind of the stages of escalation that we'll see from here?
Yeah, well, it's clear that Trump has made a political decision to turn this whole thing into a policing problem in hopes that, his reactionary conservative base will embrace this kind of law and order authoritarian approach. So he's doubling down on this kind of rancid authoritarian politics. What's so surprising is the extent that local mayors in progressive democratic cities are following right along with this. They've also decided to turn this problem over to the police. And I think part of it is that they've run out of excuses. They've run out of fake reforms that they can trot out in front of people, and they just don't know what to say. So they are just saying these are criminals, and we're going to create curfews and mass arrests of protesters and the complete suppression of legitimate dissent. Extremely dangerous. I think it shows how liberals, when push comes to shove, are not our allies. They will always choose order over justice.
Yeah, I'm curious how you do see the political moment right now. I mean, in 2016, we had nearly 100 million people not vote in the presidential election, a shocking number that speaks volumes to our democratic system being completely in shambles. We're basically not a democracy. Again, I live in Washington, D.C., a territory of America where I don't have representation in Congress. So democracy, probably not already the best word to use, but Dr. Vitale, democracy already falling apart here. We already had Bernie Sanders, who was kind of the movement leader for younger people in this country, have, again, not the best run because of the Democratic Party stacking the deck against him. Those people feeling disenfranchised. Other people now also feeling like they need to speak out. But if the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are offering the same solution, there's kind of nowhere to go in that political two-party system sphere. And so I'm just curious what this means and where this is going to leave a country that's so proud of its democracy and voting, and that is kind of how we work out our electoral conversation. It seems like it's going to be a really interesting next few months heading into November's election.
Yes, that's an understatement. I mean, it's clear that, our democracy is facing a crisis. Even before this moment, way in which big money has so perverted the political process has really disenfranchised a huge part of the population, at all levels. This is not to say, though, that this is not a tool that can be used strategically and situationally in the right circumstances. I think there are openings, especially the further down the political hierarchy you go, there are openings. There are possibilities of voting people in who share some of our vision and are trying to resist authoritarianism. But Their chance of doing that only exists when our movements are in the streets, making trouble, creating that political space for them to operate. So I certainly don't think we should be investing all our political energy into electoral politics. We need to create vital, powerful social movements with the right kinds of deep analysis behind them.
Dr. Vitale, I'm so glad you said that, because I absolutely agree with you. After 2016 and 2020, I think my perspective, I can't say radically shifted, but definitely shifted to the notion that the political space doesn't have a solution. I mean, basically you have two parties, both of which are captured by corporate cash. And despite them calling themselves two different or two wings or two different parties, basically they're just two wings of the same bird. I mean, their point of view, their framing of the world, even the way they consider capital, cash, criminal justice, military, all of those things are for the most part just gradations among each other. They're not necessarily radically different. What have been the bipartisan measures politically that have been put in place to allow this police state to evolve in this way, the way that we see it now, either with the cops and the way that they can act with impunity, the jails themselves and the proliferation of those jails, and for that matter, even the economic consequences or the economic decisions that have basically put people right in line with cops as they go about, as they put people in the line of cops.
Yeah, well, there's been a bipartisan consensus around two things. One is an embracing of a kind of neoliberal austerity politics. Says that, government can't really do anything to lift people up. What we need to do is to take as much as we can the resources of government and use them to subsidize the already most successful parts of the economy, Wall Street, bankers, that sort of thing, in hopes that somehow magically that wealth will trickle down to the rest of us. The other bipartisan consensus is that the way we respond to the consequences of that system, growing inequality and social disorder, is that we criminalize it. You can see this in the 94 crime bill, in the rise of policing in individual cities across the country. In both cases, there's just this deep abrogation of any sense of responsibility for the well-being of those who've been left out of global economy. Mass homelessness, mass unemployment, mass untreated mental health and substance abuse problems. Those problems are just not going to get addressed, going to be criminalized. That's really the challenge that we're up against in this political moment, because the mainstream Democrats really don't have an analysis that's going to get us out of this fundamental mess that we're in.
And that's unfortunate. I mean, it really is, because basically that means both parties have abdicated their responsibility in dealing with either the economic concerns, and by definition, because they don't deal with the economic concerns, these other issues, like you say, of criminal justice that kind of come out of the abrogation of that responsibility. Bob, from your standpoint, I'm curious, as an organizer, and as you hear this, I would imagine you have to deal with people, or you have to work with people who either came out of the criminal justice system, or at the very least, people who have needs in the various communities that you can somewhat probably attest to far more than I think a lot of other people could, since you're on the front lines of that.
Yeah, I think it's what Dr. Vitale is saying about the fact that we need to stop seeing people as like criminals and evil beings that were born evil and they just had evil in their eyes since they were little people. No, there's reasons in which people commit crime, and they're in a state of unhealth when they're committing that crime. And if we see people as being unhealthy, then there are solutions and ways to cure people of that disease where they would possibly feel the need to be violent, or what we deem as violent is obviously much debated as we continue to talk about that topic. But if we actually see people as humans, as somebody that could be our family member, and take that approach, we would solve these issues much quicker, because people simply turn towards the police to arrest people. And you talk to police, talk to some police, and they get this. They say simply, we're sick and tired of having to police poverty. We arrest people, we bring them in one night, and then they're out again the next day. If you break curfew, you basically get brought in and then you're released right away, and then they're going to break curfew again. The police officers that you talk to that actually are honest and true to what's happening basically say, look, these are issues of poverty. There's nothing that policing is going to do. We need to stop it. And to your point, Jamal, I was with the protesters last night, and I talked to a man who just had returned home from being incarcerated, and he was just looking for some money for a meal that evening. And I gave him a phone number of another returning citizen that he could reach out to for support. And he had no phone numbers to call. He had no type of support. So even after we incarcerate somebody, we just let them back out into the streets with no type of basic safety social net for them to land on. We don't give them a shelter. I think of a YMCA and my mother, who worked at a YMCA, her career, they used to have men's shelters for people where they actually could get nourishment and get exercise and get healthy and get back into the community. We don't have communities that do that, and we especially don't have that here in Washington, D.C., a city that is colonizing and gentrifying, displacing, however you want to put it. But you have a weird population where people aren't from here moving in. They have $1 million homes, and they're living next to people that are impoverished. 3 blocks from my house, you can walk to the main Columbia Heights Circle, and there are people that are sleeping in the circle right now on the ground. And they're a stone's throw away from $1 million houses. The people with $1 million houses, they have no interest in these people. They wouldn't have bought that $1 million house, moved into these neighborhoods, and showed any regards to these people if they did. And that's where this kind of juxtaposition takes place. And we really do need to, again, question what is our government prioritizing. And here in Washington, D.C., we gave a $200+ million subsidy to a developer to build the Wharf, which is just basically a playground for the rich, which is twice as much money as we spent an entire year building affordable housing. So Dr. Vitale, I mean, that intersection between what our government is prioritizing really shows who they are prioritizing, what class of people at the expense of another.
And that's a great example, right, of where their priorities are. Is that there's always money for, a real estate deal downtown, and there's never money to build a community center out in the neighborhoods. And the idea that people will continue to accept this fake idea of trickle-down economics, it's been decades, and I'm still waiting for the trickle-down, right? It's not happening. Money is becoming more and more concentrated at the top, and we let these local politicians get away with it. They trot out these feel-good slogans, and they talk about taking a knee and how we need more diversity. And then they subsidize the wealthiest people in the community. And this has got to stop.
I'm curious, Dr. Vitale, from your standpoint, what would you call, look, I guess it's 2 questions, actually, but they're connected. What is the main misconception that people have when they're thinking of the criminal justice system? And on top of that, what would you say to those people, 1 or 2 things, in order to remove that misconception that they have of our criminal justice system?
Main misconception people have is that when they see horrible death, they think the system is broken. It's not working right, that it needs to be fixed. What they need to understand is that is what it looks like when the system is working. That is baked into the institution. That if you don't want violence, you don't want racially disparate outcomes, don't get the criminal justice system involved. Because that has always been its nature. It is a tool for reproducing those inequalities through violence and coercion.
Oh, that would be basically the way you would try to explain to them, like, look, that is not the way. Because I think you're getting to the bad apple argument that I think people take. That basically, it's not the entirety of it. It's just a bad apple here or there. And your point is, it's not a bad apple. That's basically the way these guys are trained, and that's the way the incentives push them to behave.
Yeah, it's like a totally lawful, procedurally proper, low-level drug arrest going to ruin some young person's life for no good reason. Yes. And we don't need to give narcotics units anti-bias training. We need to get rid of the war on drugs. Because those officers are doing what they've been told to do. Training is irrelevant. Trying to make them friendlier is irrelevant. Trying to get the community to accept them is irrelevant. You have to stop arresting people for that and try to develop real solutions, treat people with dignity and respect and try to build them up, not tear them down.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely with the training aspect, especially. And again, going back to my earlier conversation in the first hour there, Mark Esper talking about it being a battleground, the Secretary of Defense and other police basically coordinating efforts right now. And you really do need to question these systems and what they're rooted in to understand that just a simple training reform is not going to change decades, if not centuries of police culture. And there was videos out yesterday, Dr. Vitale, where basically one kind of camera, I don't think the officer realized that they were on camera. They said, well, what's going to happen at 7 p.m. when the curfew comes? They said something like, we're going to start smashing your heads. And I was also biking home last night. And again, it got quite scary around like 10:30, 11 p.m. Eastern time. And I was biking up a pretty lit street, and there was people, about 5 or 6 people that were walking quietly, peacefully just up the road. And an officer with a tear gas gun basically pulls up, screams at all of them, threatens to shoot the weapon, and then speeds up the street. And you had dozens of police cars, sirens on, flooding the streets last night. Just because, again, there's protests and people speak up does not mean that there are naturally going to be reforms or complete cultural changes. We've been in this moment before, people. This is not the first time a George Floyd has been killed, and it will not be the last time. We've been in these protest situations before. So, Dr. Vitale, talk us through again how in the past this de-escalated. What is the role of the media, the government, the police? How do they basically try to get us to forget about these things, get us to forget about Rodney King or the Watts riots or the Tulsa bombing all the way back to 100 years ago now? How are we going to forget, and then how can we fight back and make sure we don't forget and keep pressing these issues?
Yeah, well, they're going to do everything they can in the coming months, right? Rehabilitate the police, to convince the public that this was all just an aberration. They're trying to fix it. They're going to trot out same old tired procedural justice fixes, the pointless training programs, the pointless PR things. And it's up to us all that out as unacceptable. Demand that we quit relying on policing for every problem under the sun. And I think what's most exciting to me about this current moment is that from the streets, nobody's calling for body cameras and community policing. People are calling for defunding the police, or reducing scope, intensity of their power. And that is the way we have to go. We have to defang that beast by starving it, by taking away their toys, by taking away their resources, by limiting the scope of their operations. We got to get them out of our schools. We got to get them out of dealing with homelessness. We got to get them out of dealing with mental health crises. We got to end the war on drugs. We've got to decriminalize sex work. These are the things that are going to provide relief to people, to create space for us to do the kind of organizing that's needed to create a better future.
You know, this brings to mind the perspective of the public towards the police. That basically, I think it was a recent poll that came out yesterday, Morning Consult, if I'm not mistaken, showing that there's been moderate movement where the public thinks basically that the police, or that violent crime is, or cops and the way that they abuse the public itself is somewhat of a health risk. Now, I appreciate that because at the very least it's over 50%. And I'm always not entirely clear on how the public views the behavior of police, because I always, just because African Americans may be killed at higher rates doesn't necessarily mean that they won't kill or injure you, not to mention tase and beat you, regardless of whatever your racial distinction is. As you said, it's in the bricks. It's the way the guys behave. With what's coming up, meaning the rent evictions or the evictions that are supposedly coming up in the next few months, the 43% of jobs not coming back, the 44 million people that are out of work, that number is only going to go up. What are you expecting to come up here, to come from this? And do you look at this as Donald Trump taking a political position that he assumes that one segment of the population that this directly deals with is not going to vote anyway for him? And because that section of the population is not going to vote for him, he can take this tack that he believes his base, law and order, will basically give him a pass on. Like, I'm fascinated by what you see of this. Like, how do you see this turning out in the political space, but also from the standpoint of the public?
Yeah, let me talk about this for a second, and then I'm going to have to jump off. But basically, we need a multiracial poor people's movement. It has a class politics. It is not going to accept a bunch of liberal fantasies. And that is really, I think, the only way we're going to make progress here. I think we've got to look to some of the remnants of the Occupy Wall Street movement, some of the deepest thinking of the Black Lives Matter movement, and figure out a way to bring those things together. And frankly, look out in the streets in a lot of cities right now. That's what you see is a multiracial coalition, folks who are getting tired of being treated as though their lives don't matter. And we've got to give, there needs to be a clear political direction for that movement. But I think there's something there to work with.
Yeah, thank you again. That was Dr. Alex Vitale, sociology professor at Brooklyn College and author of the recent book, The End of Policing. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
Deshaun, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. We also bring you every Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time our Politics of Art segment. This week, we look at the world of sports in the midst of COVID-19 and national protests. Jamarl, I know you aren't a big sports guy, but I know you're going to love this conversation. A bit like when you get going on UFOs and Star Trek, I get going on sports. Jamarl, if you're out there saying basically, wait a second, sports, art and sports, how do these intersect? Have you ever watched a grown man sprint 40 yards in 4 seconds? Seen a 7-foot man jump and spin 360 degrees and dunk a basketball? The physics behind throwing a baseball 100 miles per hour, or watching gymnasts do all sorts of spins, twists, and turns in the air. It is an incredible art form of the human body to display its ability through athletic movement. If that's not enough, is there any greater phenomenon that shapes our culture as much as sports? Millions of Americans daily watch in person or on television their favorite sports, and each of the different sports have their own subculture, from NASCAR to golf to gymnastics to the NBA. You get all sorts of fans coming to tune in, and look no further than Colin Kaepernick and his NFL protests over the last few years to see the direct intersection between politics and sports. So let's jump into it. Joining us for this conversation is Nathaniel Wallace, the creator of the Redspin Sports YouTube show and podcast. Nathaniel, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Nathaniel, I was really excited about your new show. I had the chance to catch some of the first episodes on YouTube with my guy, Michael Sampson, down there in Jacksonville, a good friend of mine. You guys were talking about one of my old school favorites, Chicago Bull sharpshooter Craig Hodges. Not a lot of people give credit to Hodges or know the history of Craig Hodges. Nathaniel, Hodges, as many people may remember, was basically pushed out of the NBA. He was very vocal. And when the Bulls had visited the White House back in the early 90s after they had won the NBA championship, he delivered a letter to George H.W. Bush regarding the Bush senior administration's treatment of poor and minority communities in the United States, and he was basically blacklisted from the NBA, never played again, and would have gone on to be one of the greatest three-point shooters of all time if his career would have continued. And Nathaniel, in the same vein there, obviously we think a lot about Colin Kaepernick's protest, and one image that will now forever be burned in my mind will be the side-by-side photo of Officer Chauvin there in Minneapolis with his knee kneeling on George Floyd's neck next to Colin Kaepernick taking a knee on the side of an NFL sideline, just kind of juxtaposed next to each other, saying that is why Colin Kaepernick was protesting. It was a troubling image. It was a powerful image, but it reminded us that Colin Kaepernick's protest did have an impact. It was drawing attention to these conversations, and a lot of people are paying attention because of Colin Kaepernick. And I can tell you that I was out there last night. It was a lot of young people, and those young people that were out there protesting last night, they don't know who Joe Biden is. They don't pay attention to Donald Trump outside of the kind of the pop culture of things. And they actually are in these protest movements because of sports figures like Colin Kaepernick. We also seen NBA and WNBA players wearing the I Can't Breathe shirts after Eric Gardner was killed, and they were moved. So, Nathaniel, sports activism has an incredible ability to shape the consciousness of masses of folks. How do you see the relationship between sports and politics, especially in this current moment?
Well, I mean, there's so many different ways I could go with it. I don't want to get too jumbled up. I've just finished reading Craig Hodges' book, and the thing we had actually have up on YouTube already is just kind of a sort of a precursor to an episode I'm about to record now that I've done more research. But in terms of Hodges, real quick, before we go on to something else, Hodges was a guy who played 10 years in the NBA, was from the Chicago area, was really raised in a family that was rooted in social activism. From a young age, he was out, getting petitions signed. They were marching. He saw part of when Dr. King was in Chicago in the 60s. He was, they were going to marches with Dr. King. And so Hodges grew up, and he had prowess on the basketball court. He was an excellent player. He ended up being recruited to Long Beach State by Tech's winner, who ended up being Phil Jackson's top assistant. So that relationship ended up getting him back to the Bulls later on in the late 80s, where he won 3 straight three-point shooting contests, where he was part of 2 NBA titles. And but he's really a tragic figure, because when you look at it, he was coming into this space, this political space of the 80s, the Reagan era, right off the heels of that, where player activism was just like seen as Michael Jordan would put it, like his whole rule was play the game being a metaphor for, staying apolitical. That's the number one rule you got to follow, kind of. And for Hodges, he thought he couldn't stomach being part of what was like the most influential group of black men, as he put it, in the world at that time, and yet not having them use their power, especially with Rodney King. He was, Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan just laughed it off when he was trying to organize a boycott of the 91 NBA finals before, calling him extreme and that's too crazy, Hodge, that sort of stuff. And
just to pause on your point there. If LeBron James said, "I am not going to play in Game 6 of the NBA Finals until there was some effort to address police brutality in this country," could you imagine, Nathaniel, what would happen in this country if these athletes refused to play in championship games?
Well, first of all, it would make the people that are in charge of things have to make concessions, and we saw that. He cited an example being the 1964 NBA All-Star Game, which was the first one that was televised. It had guys like Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, Tom Heinsohn, and Elgin Baylor, and they decided to dress out the game, get ready, and then sit in the locker room and not go out, putting the owners on the spot. That they were then getting pressured by the TV executives, like, "You're going to lose this spot. You got to do something. You got to do something." And eventually, they capitulated to all their demands. Back at that time, pro athletes didn't make huge sums of money. In fact, they were very exploited, and it could be argued, even though despite the salaries today, that people don't understand the long-term kind of costs that are associated, and the other ways owners are able to for payments and all sorts of things, and all the other hazards that come with that. So that's an example of real power. An example of players exerting real power. It got them, it was a pension. It got them all sorts of gains in terms of just job safety stuff and just security. And it takes that kind of stuff, leveraging, when you talk about brand, right? Athletes leveraging that into ability to demand concessions, demand like concrete action on things that matter in the realm of social justice, economic justice, and labor. And I think that should be a model. And there's a reason why the ruling class and owners have fought so hard to, if they cover their bases and say where it's hard to prove being blackballed, but it's just undeniable too.
Yeah, and I'm just fascinated too here. If sports comes back online here, obviously each of the different 4 major sports in the United States are all at different. NASCAR's back. The UFC has kind of never gone away. Sean Blackman, if you're listening, the WWE, if you want to call it a sport, they also had matches without audiences out there. But Nathaniel, I mean, that's kind of the question that I'm wondering is if somehow the NFL starts in the fall, if somehow the basketball or NHL are able to complete their seasons with some type of modified playoff schedule, and if baseball, the same thing. And I'll ask you a little bit more about baseball because I'm really fascinated by the labor conversation that's taking place in that sport right now as they're trying to figure out what to do with their season, which has technically just begun, is in the kind of the first month, I guess, of what it would be if they were playing. But if sports do come back online, I think we're going to see activism amongst these players speak out. I mean, we've seen players across the board driving long distances to be in different cities right now and are speaking up. And if they go back online and back on TV, which is basically one of the underlying drivers, is there's huge television contracts and tons of money to be made. Will those television channels still film these people if you have NBA, NFL, I'm not going to say baseball. I have no hope for baseball given the whiteness of that league right now. But if you have multiple athletes making political statements, it'll be interesting. These owners rushing to get them back on the field or back on the court. But then if there's going to be a backlash all of a sudden, if players start speaking out, what they're going to do to suppress that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a major thing to keep an eye on. I mean, it's also fascinating just even before we talk about getting live sports back. Look at the ratings ESPN was doing for The Last Dance. Really reintroducing a whole new generation to Jordan. And Jordan is like a complex guy. I mean, at some level, if your critique is only going to be, he didn't get involved in electoral politics, whatever. It's like this man was essentially set up. He was pretty apolitical. Nike was not Nike back then. Jordan launches that and creates this behemoth that is Nike. And part of that is essentially, like Hodges would say, playing the game, not breaking the cardinal rule to get involved in stuff. And but if your critique is coming from the fact that, it's like he's coming at it from a place where it's fundamentally just he had a role in actually pushing Craig Hodges out the door. But they get back to sports and coming back. I think it's going to be a huge thing. I think that you're going to see various levels of players just not complying. You're going to see guys not come back. You're going to see you're going to see that arena and that platform. You're going to see fights over who has the authority over that space. Owners being fans, some of these reactionary fans talking about, when you're playing, no politics in sports, which is the biggest joke ever. When you think of the amount of money for flyovers there are at NFL games, you think it's just the exploitation of patriotism to, really, it just be a sort of festival.
And Jamal, I mean, I was giggling there myself, Nathaniel. The last time I had gone to Chicago, I'm a big Chicago Cubs fan. My main sport I watch there is baseball. I know it's horrible. The Ricketts family, just absolute trash. Oh, it's so frustrating still. But Jamar, I mean, the last game I went to was the military night. And I was like, man, what are the chances that out of the 82 games a year they play, 81 games a year they play here at Wrigley Field in the regular season, I happen to be here on military night, and somebody's like, oh, no. This is the 6th military night of the year, Military Appreciation Night. They give everybody camouflaged tinted, I'm wearing it right now, camouflage-esque Chicago Cubs hats, and then on the back of it, it's sponsored by Boeing. And during the game, during the first pitch, they had basically a different military member go to each of the different positions on the field while everybody gave a standing ovation. And I'm telling you, I was sitting there, and usually these are times where I just kind of sit there quietly. But it was one of those things where I was like, man, this feels dangerous at this point to stay seated, given the kind of fever and the energy of this crowd around the military and the hoorah, that I just stood up quietly because I just wasn't in a space to face that, given who I was with. And so, Jamal, that intersection, as Nathaniel's speaking to, between the military and sports is pretty pronounced with all of those flyovers and the huge 100-yard length military American flags that they roll out.
Yeah, that's a heavy level of propaganda, ain't it? I mean, basically, our country is so weird on this. I mean, we spend $1 trillion on the military and deify it. I mean, we basically worship the troops in name. Not when they get back, and not if they're ill, and not to keep them from wars, to keep them from being injured. But in name, when they're killing and so forth, we love them to death. I'm curious. Michael Jordan was probably my favorite sports person growing up. And you make the point that he was famous for being apolitical, not getting into politics at all, despite things that are going on around him. People were being shot and killed around Jordan. He just never got involved. I am curious. What do you think would have happened if he did? I mean, do you think that brand would have just like went up in smoke, or do you think he would have had the ability to pull people over because of so many people that loved him? I'm curious on how do you think they would have regarded him with the level at the height of his celebrity doing something like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been thinking about this a lot, and part of me just literally thought the other day, and that maybe have that level of singular focus and that like assassin's level, top, just heart, competitive heart. It's like you talk about just even super competitive guys in the NBA, guys on the dream team talking about, he doesn't just want to beat you. He wants to drive you into the ground. If that's part of if that mentality is even compatible, with, really, just such a singular focus, but that's a whole other thing and people can get into it. But in terms of the difference, I think it would have had it. And I think he would have perhaps lost, he wanted to bend that iconic, I want to be like Mike, Gatorade and Space Jam guy. But you talk about a kind of crowd that he could have influenced, and you also look at what was going on politically. And you had the fall of the Eastern Bloc going on. You had all sorts of triumphant, rhetoric coming out about the capitalism, the end of history. I remember that Francis Fukushima essay that seems ironic now. But I think there was an opportunity. That's why it pained Craig Hodges so much. You read his memoir, rips your heart out. I mean, the guy's he cared so much, and he basically admitted he couldn't keep his mouth shut, just for another couple months until after the '92 NBA Finals. And he had a number of things he said, cardinal sins he broke. I mean, you're trying to organize boycotts, speaking out constantly. He turned down Jordan's agent who tried to get him to become head of the NBA Players Union, but essentially as a rubber stamp. That kind of marked him a year before he ended up not having anyone sign him. But I think Jordan's influence could have been huge, and that's why Craig Hodges, I think, was so pained by it. And, wants to also not just hyper-focus on being critical of Jordan, the person. It's not on an athletic level, there's been just on a world level, there's a lot bigger villains. And he hasn't, just in honesty, he's inspired a lot of people in terms of that, just the heart. You watch, I'm not going to lie, you watch that Last Dance, or you get your adrenaline flowing a little bit, the old athlete and being the competitor, but it's hard. I mean, Craig Hodges, I think he's right. I think they had an opportunity, could have been transformative, and it just, for whatever reason, the political education wasn't there. Maybe just the moment wasn't there. Maybe, it was time. I just didn't really have anyone in.
He also made the mistake there of defending Louis Farrakhan, which is another check against him. So yeah, Craig Hodges is still, I guess, one of my favorite memories. He was the first ever basketball card I had signed by somebody. I wonder if it's still in my old childhood home closet. We'll have to go back through the archives. We just have a few minutes left here. We're continuing on Political Misfits, joined by Nathaniel Wallace. Nathaniel, I wanted to talk a little bit about the economics of the sport right now of baseball. I think that one is kind of the most intriguing. It seems like where the largest impasse is at between owners and players not being able to come to an agreement. It was proposed yesterday by Major League Baseball and owners, a 114-game schedule that would cover 70% of the original salaries of players, and they have a contingency plan, a 50-game schedule with a full pro rata would pay the players around 30% of that number. I know obviously a lot of people out there are listening and they're simply saying, oh my God, boo-hoo, a bunch of millionaires are at odds with billionaires, and surely some of these players are getting paid really well. But Nathaniel, talk us a little bit through, not all players get paid equally. There's obviously minor league baseball, which is being gutted and being ripped back in many ways. Plenty of players don't make the league minimum. So what's kind of the labor dispute taking place right now in Major League Baseball?
Well, first of all, I'm going to get to that, but I really want to point out the whole thing about millionaires, boo-hoo, whatever. Look, we got to realize under a capitalist system, the way this is operating, it's not as if that money doesn't go to the players in the form of salaries, that money is just going to be given to education or to healthcare, or appropriated to things we think it needs to go towards, right? It's just going to go to the owner's bottom line. And these owners are fighting for an ever bigger piece of that. And the players know that. So the reality is, well, we can look at, the just corporatization of the game, how all the different ways they, just bringing obsessive, Yankee Stadium does one of those military things every day. But where they bring in someone, Operation Iraqi Freedom, no sense of irony, and everyone's just cheering like crazy. But the owners have a fundamental interest where if that money is not going to the people that are, making the sport happen, taking the risk in their bodies, right, and paying the price for that down the line, And that money's going to these billionaire owners. And one thing I really like to study, and I've talked about before a good bit, and I'm going to do another episode on it here shortly, is who these NFL owners are, MLB owners, NBA owners. These people have a relationship with the military industrial complex, with the whole system of just neoliberal capitalism that's obviously in crisis right now. So to just sort of dismiss sport and beyond just the things we've been talking about is just the reactionary space. It's just inherently, just there's nothing really good that can come from it. It's really a missed opportunity. I think something the left needs to learn from. But in terms of the labor dispute right now, from my understanding, and I wish I was I know the 114 game schedule thing was proposed, but the players are also being asked to take deeper cuts, not even just prorated, because of to account for the loss of TV revenue and other revenues that have to do with the gates at games and whatnot. So I mean, I just see maybe there's going to be a lot of guys who don't show up. I think that, like you said earlier, activism could really enter the arena in baseball in a way it hasn't before. And it's just going to be weird because like you mentioned, minor league baseball, those guys, they ride buses, stay at really cheap motels and don't make a lot of money. And so it's there's a lot of issues involved, and I think there's things we can learn from it. It's a very multinational group of players too. A lot of guys the number of Venezuelan players, for instance, and Dominican guys is unbelievable. And Cali Maglio Ordonez, you might know from the White Sox and Tigers, is actually a mayor of one of the biggest cities in Venezuela. It was. So there's a lot of stuff that's out there that I think people just don't aren't conscious of that could have a huge cultural impact in terms of reaching people, and we need to try to recognize it is really political, like everything is, and it's not just escapist entertainment. But I think that we're going to see player activism like we've never seen it before this summer.
Yeah, you had a deep cut there with me referencing a White Sox player. Well, my Wilson Contreras, the Chicago Cubs, the Venezuelan catcher, was speaking out against Nicolas Maduro and taking the side of the U.S. government. So we have some more political education to do of the players, but I completely agree. They have a powerful voice, and basically they block these owners from getting back on television. If there's some type of strike, a labor strike by these sports players, it's going to cost a lot of those owners a lot of money. But as to your point, I think we should remember that a lot of these owners of these teams aren't making their money from owning the team. They have their billions of dollars from outside of the sport. It's more just kind of a hobby horse for them. While these players, they're playing for their lives. I mean, it's much more real for them and their families than it ever will be for these owners of these teams just trying to look for more money and have the cool press and the more luxurious boxes to watch their ownership at play. Well, with that, we are out of time, unfortunately, with Nathaniel Wallace, the creator of Redspin Sports YouTube show and podcast. Nathaniel, just give us a quick 30-second pitch for Redspin Sports and what you're looking to do with the new show.
All right, so we're going to be launching here really soon. I have some stuff up on the YouTube channel now, but it's really just kind of some preliminary type stuff. Enhanced getting the equipment together, and we had a lot going on. I'm a teacher up in Jersey City right now, and kind of crazy with the whole distance learning and stuff. But a lot of material I've been preparing for it, and hopefully Max Blumenthal has been a mentor, and it's helped me and to kind of help launch this as sort of a sports aspect of what his site, the Gray Zone, where we can have me kind of focus on that sort of realm and how that affects the economics, social issues, and how it affects the issues of empire and stuff too. So I'm going to be having stuff out here within the next week. It's going to be coming out with more regularity.
That's great. That was Nathaniel Wallace, creator of Redspin Sports YouTube show and podcast. We'll make sure to tweet out there on Sputnik Misfits when that show is out. With that, we do need to turn to our final break of the show. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in DC. We're back after this.
The most important hour of the day. It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I have been rejoined with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. So we're coming to the last, 6 minutes. And so I'm just going to choose the story that's most important. At the very least, that's most important to me. I have that power since I am controlling the section. Now, Blackout Tuesday is drowning out vital information shared under the Black Lives Matter hashtag. Now, what does that mean? So it's Blackout Tuesday. What does that mean? Not much, apparently. Now, why do we keep doing stuff like this? I suppose the idea is that instead of spending time sharing pictures of food or pets or violence, that was one of the other ones, that we will put a black square and educate ourselves on the Black Lives Matter movement. Is this performative BS? Yes. Is everybody doing it poorly? No. But honestly, there's a limit to how much awareness something like this can raise. Change, especially real change that goes a little bit beyond incremental, requires an awareness, that's true, but social media has a sneaky way of making us feel like we're doing something that we haven't done and that we're a part of something that we're not actually a part of, at least in the standpoint of work. Critics are also pointing out that the hashtags and other organizing tools are just being drowned out by black squares, which at the time when a lot of organizing is happening, is not all that useful. If you want to get into this particular fray and do some work and spend some time, go for it. If you don't, maybe this is time for a little respectful quiet. Maybe just not posting silly stuff for a day, so would be better than this performative sharing. If you're going to be quiet right now, just be quiet. And if it feels weird for you, as it probably should, then consider why. But don't post black squares and call it work. It's just noise. If you actually want to get involved, there are certain ways to get involved if you don't necessarily want to go out and protest. Call the government officials, fact check social media posts, contribute to and share bail funds, donate supplies to street medics. Many of the supplies were lost at night when protesters were chased away. Also, we saw situations where cops was destroying basically water, or for that matter, destroying the supplies of the various people who were there. There was one case where they were harassing a nurse and chased people away from the spot. So Bob, you and Michelle will probably know this better than I would. With the water and stuff like that, how were you guys distributing that stuff when you guys were out there?
I mean, it was interesting. People are kind of just set up at a church. Was really interesting there in Logan Circle, Washington, D.C. And so people were walking by and they were volunteers themselves. So again, if you don't want to go to the protest, there's a lot of church groups, a lot of different organizations in your community just providing shelter, food, water support for protesters. Other people, honestly, if you just want to go down and bring a 24 case of water, fill up a backpack as much as you can carry, and you go down to these protests, people are on their feet for hours on end, Jamal. And that was incredible last night. And also kind of one of the reasons that things spiraled at the end of the night like they did. I mean, people are hungry, people are tired, people haven't had water. So if you're looking to support, I mean, it's just water and granola bars, hand them out, and then you can go home. You can be there for 10 minutes and have a huge impact. And to your point again, people just stop. Sometimes you don't need to say something. Obviously, there's a need to speak out. It's a cathartic process to talk tomorrow. But in kind of your response to Michelle Obama that one time was like, just no, stop talking a little bit.
Yeah.
Just stop. You don't need to say something right now. And it's incredibly painful. If you're a white person right now, talk to other white friends, but I don't know. It's just one of those messes, and then you end up, and I get stuck in it too at times where all of a sudden I'm debating some other white person that I knew from high school on Facebook about who knows what, and then we get down some type of spiral tomorrow. So it is really trying to take a breath, really try to be thoughtful in how you engage with people right now because emotions are high. It is an incredibly scary moment. But again, the more we kind of yell at each other, distract each other, pick the wrong fights, that's how the system basically kind of resets itself and is able to kind of suppress the voice of people once again.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I am curious about something else also. Like you said, many of the people who were out there were new. This was their first time protesting. I think I might have been to 2 protests in my life. And when I was sitting here, last night, I was ready to go after hearing that speech from Trump. I thought he was just unhinged. Like, I couldn't believe that he was... Actually, that's not true. When Donald Trump was about to come on, I thought to myself, I was like, he's about to make this a lot worse. And then he went farther than I expected. How do people deal with the tear gas? What should people expect from the standpoint of, like, dealing with the bang grenades? Like, if you had to explain to people what it was like being out there, and not just what it was like being out there, how they should prepare if they're going to go out to one of these, what would you tell them?
Just be hyper vigilant, keep your head on a swivel, be mindful of how close you are to the police. If you don't want to deal with tear gas or flash grenades, stay 100 yards back, stay 50 yards back. I mean, there's plenty of ways to stay distance at these protests, but just be incredibly mindful. And again, if you're new to protests, if you're not sure where you are, if it's getting dark out, it doesn't feel like there's a good crowd, then just don't be there at that point. You don't need to prove a point somehow to the state at that moment. But with that, we are out of time. Big thank you to our guests, Dr. Alex Vitale, Tracy Red, and Michelle Whitty. Thank you to our radio engineers, as always, Ryan, Dimitri, Andre, and Saul, and the entire Sputnik News team. Will continue to cover the protest live this evening. Check us out on social media, and we'll be back tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for a brand new Political Misfits. On behalf of Jamarl Thomas and myself, Bob Schlegelber, thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
Guys, as always, I appreciate you guys joining me for the show. We had up to 300 and some people today. We're getting back to our normal, apparently. I don't necessarily know if it's the topic, subject matter, if you guys are just rejoining me with the economy opening back up, I'm not sure. But whatever it is, definitely we appreciate your engagement and your contact. You guys help make the show what it is. Wesley Walker, thank you, man. Zach Bowles, the censorship fact-checking is terrifying. Doesn't anyone see the next fact check would be against Medicare for all, public higher education, etc.? Well, they already did that, right? I mean, when Bernie Sanders came out and said 500,000 people are losing their health insurance, and Washington Post comes out and says, yeah, this is false. And then they call the author of the study, and the author of the study says, yes, it's actually 530,000. They still marked it false. So it's like, fact checkers can't substitute good judgment and being able to have, a certain degree of honesty when you're engaging information. Sometimes these guys are just doing political spin. There's no where to go with that. I mean, there's no safety. All of this stuff is always relative, where you're stuck still trying to get information. I mean, even if you believe a source, doesn't necessarily mean the source is going to be flat fact right all the time. There's always potential for certain levels of gradation in regards to how accurate something is. But I mean, you do your best in regards to trying to figure out what's more true than not, and trying to get behind what these guys are actually trying to go for. Yes, the fact-checking websites are problematic, and you would think that isn't that the job of media to do fact-checking. Think of Twitter fact-checking independent journalists claiming weapons of mass destruction during the Iraq War. No, I agree with you. And CNN, same thing. I agree with you. I mean, they did that with the Syria chemical strike, if you remember, where it was like there was a chemical weapon strike. It was like, what are you talking about? Where? And then the media will come out and says, no, how dare you say that wasn't a chemical weapon strike? They do that now. That's not something that's changed per se. Manor Talk. Trump just authorized the covert action statute. Ugh, very bad for everyone. All right, I have to look that one up. I don't know what the covert action statute is, but I'll check it out. Check out voteheard.org. I will. It's a work in progress. Manor Talk. I will. Voteheard.org. And there's one more down here that I am having difficulty seeing. Oh, Marcus Will. Jamal, you are wrong. The fact check was censorship. They edited Trump's posts to include a source from CNN, and not the same as it happens with Bernie. Oh, I see what you mean. You guys are talking about something different. Okay, maybe I misunderstood something. The fact check, quote unquote, was censorship. They edited Trump's posts to include a source from CNN. It's not the same as okay, fair enough. I need to see what specific you're referring to, but that's fair. I check it out. And there was one more. All right, I don't see the other one. All right, guys, I'm going to end this here because they're going to be calling me short. Oh, here it is. And this is Anna Jalen. George Carlin said in 2008, you have no rights. You have a list of temporary privileges. Yes, that's exactly what it is. And that gets shorter every year. Yes, that's exactly what it is, right? I mean, think of what they would say, you have a curfew at 1 p.m. Why? So at that point, anybody is criminalized. Well, that cop has all discretion in the world to go after somebody. Or I smell pot in the car. Why? Because at that point, the cop can open the car and pretty much do what he wants and violate your rights and just tell the judge, I smell pot in the car. Somebody probably was in the car beforehand. Like, they do this constantly, the stealing your property that cops are legally allowed to do. Like, they flagrantly violate rights. And right now, Donald Trump is basically blowing off First Amendment and your ability to protest. And that's after when you had this major grievance. Not just one, multiples lining up. So, this is where we are now. And we have this kind of fascist government that has exposed itself for what it is. I would make a case that this was the same government, however, that was in place even under Obama, even though it might not have been as naked. But at this point, the socialists are going to get their naked fascist aggression, where the contradictions of the classes are going to be maxed out. What are you going to do? Whose side are you on? Like,